For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Lumkile Nkomfe. Joining me is author and multidisciplinary creative Vusumzi Ngxande, here to discuss his book titled Journey Kwantu. Your book delves into African spiritual identity and beliefs and shows how it has evolved over hundreds of years. Can you start by unpacking the significance of your book title?
The book title is inspired by a podcast that I have. And I called it The Journey Kwantu because when I started embarking on my own spiritual understanding of myself, I knew that this was a process that in many aspects won't necessarily have a destination. So I wanted to share what it is that I was learning as I was learning it. Because a lot of the time when you engage with material or work by people who deal with spirituality, it's generally from the aspect of an expert talking to people who are still learning. Whereas for me, I was like, I want to learn, but I feel like there's also a gap within the space online and podcasting whereby we are guided through the learning process instead of just being told, do this, don't do that. But I was interested in, I want to learn the process. I want to learn the reasons behind things, because more than anything, I did not necessarily embark on this journey as a way to solve anything more than just discover things.
You write about the significance of Christianity, particularly the Methodist Church of South Africa that your mother was a member of, and how that formed the initial basis of your religious upbringing. How did these experiences inform your initial understanding of identity and spirituality?
You know what's interesting that happens nowadays with the advent of social media and the freedom with which we are able to talk about a lot of things, and also with what I can call like the resurgence of interest in African spirituality, that there tended to be a perceived conflict between religion and spirituality, or the church and African beliefs and things like that. So for me, I wanted to get to understand how that came about, because when I look back at it, if I wanted to understand my spiritual beliefs now, I wanted to go back to the roots of my beliefs. And the practical reality is that the roots of my beliefs were instilled by my mother. She was the first spiritual teacher that I had, and her spiritual teaching were based on what she knew as a woman of the Methodist Church. So I wanted to investigate that, to understand why is it that she chose to raise me as a Christian, and what informed her decisions, which then inevitably leads to what made her understand the world that way. What was it in her own personal life that informed it? Then you sort of get into this spiral where you keep going back and back and back. The next thing you know, you're hundreds of years in the past trying to understand the future. So I did not necessarily intend on a particular viewpoint. I just wanted to find out what's there. I didn't go into it with a specific goal in mind. So the process then inadvertently just unfolded by itself.
What were some of the challenges that you encountered in managing the duality of practicing your faith as a Christian and having a deeper understanding of African spirituality? And what more can be done to foster greater respect for diversity of worldviews amid parochial interpretations?
This is where personal journeys become important in our understanding of, or in how we're navigating spirituality, in that there's no necessarily one size fits all as to here's how you do things. Because for me, I know that for a lot of people there is conflict between the two, but for me there isn't, because I started off in the Methodist Church, and as I detail in the book, there came a point where I left the church. I made a conscious decision. At the time, it wasn't really to leave religion. I just found myself, I remember having this conversation with my mother. I think I was probably matric. And when you're growing up in the hood, you're forced to go to church. And one morning, when my mother woke me up and said, it was Sunday, it was, let's go to church, I had this oddly honest and frank conversation with her while I was sitting on my bed. And I said to her, I don't know why I'm going to church. we get there, we sit, we're singing and whatever, I'm listening to the priest, but I don't get why I'm there. I don't see the point of it. I'm not saying I don't believe, I just don't understand it. And her words to me were, until you know why you're going to church, then don't go. So it was that first phase for me whereby my path with religion began to diverge. And from then on, I went to varsity, and when I went to varsity, I went back to church. I became a born-again Christian and things like that. And again, I got to this inflection point where I started asking myself deeper questions, in the sense that, am I really here because I want to be here, or am I here because this is what is done? And I found myself extremely conflicted with how the church existed within my context as a black person, as an African. I found there was too much conflict in terms of what I felt God was, what God should be, and things like that. And eventually I just left. I made a conscious decision that I'm leaving religion as a whole. But what's important about this point is that I didn't leave religion for African spirituality. I just told myself I need to step back from this, in very much the same way as when I had that conversation with my mother and said I want to step back from this and basically reflect within myself as to why am I here, and why am I doing this, why am I in church, why do I have these particular beliefs. And it was then in that process I said I want to basically understand spirituality as a whole. I want to understand it in all the dynamic aspects. So right now, people would think that, the intention of the book is to promote African spirituality. And it's actually not. It's really about, as the title says, I'm exploring questions around African spirituality. In many ways, I'm still exploring. It's not a thing to say that African spirituality is superior and, you shouldn't be religious in any way. My belief is that we actually at a very dynamic point where we are all trying to find ways of coexisting. For me, what's critical about this phase is that we shouldn't see it as a problem. We shouldn't see it as, I don't know how to merge the two. It's actually not a problem. It's an opportunity to say, how are we actually going to find a way?
In your opinion, what are the key nuances that can be found within African spirituality when compared with other belief systems?
I think what I found interesting about African spirituality is its evolution. I think in doing the research that I did for the book, is what I found to be astonishing is the reality that a lot of what we take to be spiritual beliefs are actually based on very practical aspects of life. They are not necessarily based on divine intervention. There's a particular chapter that deals with the interaction between culture and spirituality and how these two influence each other. And I think what's interesting about African spirituality in particular is how much of it is informed by the environment. It's informed by what's happening around us. And more than anything, that the central aspect of African spirituality is not God per se, it's people. It is actually how we interact with each other, how we interact with the environment that creates the sense of the presence of God within our lives and the presence of the ancestors. Because the thing about the afterlife from the perspective of African spirituality, which is in contrast maybe to like religion, whereby you would say, there's a better life after this one. In African spirituality, it doesn't say that when you die, you go to a better place. You just go to another place. So it infuses us with this understanding that you don't live in a way whereby you're aiming for what's going to come after. You have to take care of not just yourself. You have to take care of the environment. You have to take care of everyone. That God exists within the network of who we are, not necessarily as a separate entity that needs to be appeased and things like that.
Can you tell us more about the important role that women played in shaping African spirituality?
Sure. The most profound truth about the role that women play in African spirituality is that their story has been in many ways systematically hidden. Today we talk a lot about feminism and such movements, And within the narrative of feminism, there's a belief that there was once a time where patriarchy didn't exist. And the inference there being that in that time when there wasn't patriarchy, there was matriarchies, and that world was in some ways better than this one, by the simplest belief that obviously there wasn't violence against women, gender-based violence and things like that. But that's not in my understanding, and the research that I have done, and my understanding is that there was a time where women were central figures within the dynamic of culture and the dynamic of family, but it wasn't necessarily a sense where it was a utopia. The role that women played had a lot to do with what women can do, their connection to nature and their ability to give birth, their connection to the moon cycles. All of those aspects played a central role in how people engaged with the seasons, engaged with harvests and planting seasons and all of those things. So hence I said earlier on that a lot of our spiritual beliefs are actually based on practical things. So when you look at female deities, a lot of the time they focus on the root of their strength or their power, as it were, is rooted, in feminine cycles and reproductive cycles and things like that, which in this side, or if I can say in this realm, are practical, but also then gain spiritual significance in the spiritual realm, because the two live side by side. So there is a huge significance that women have played in shaping spirituality, but because history doesn't stand still, there has been evolution whereby that power and that centrality of the feminine energy has shifted as the global forces of colonization and global religion started shifting. It moved to the side. But what I'm finding though is that there is also a re-emergence of the aspect of femininity within spirituality that we are seeing a lot with the feminist movements that we are witnessing now, which are hearkening back to the idea that women actually have power, not just in what they can do in supporting households and stuff, but they actually carry power in and of themselves.
To what extent are oral histories and traditions playing a vital role in shaping modern African identities?
Sure. I have a very conflicted relationship with oral history, which I didn't have before this book, because before I engaged with this book, I, like everyone else, believe that oral history is important, and oral history is in many ways sacred, even until when you would engage with elders and you're talking with elders about culture, and then elders would say things like, we do this because this is how it was done, back in the day, back in the olden days. But now, once you develop this interest with history, you start understanding that there needs to be nuance, right? So when an elder says this is how things were done back in the day, the question then becomes, what back in the day do you mean? Which time period are you talking about? Because there's a very significant difference between the time frames. If you're saying back in the day, are you saying 50 years ago? Do you mean 100 years ago? Do you mean 200 years ago? Because at each stage of these time frames, people were different. People were doing different things. So the unfortunate reality of oral history is that oral history does not gauge time very well. And oral history has a very limited spectrum of what it is that it can encompass, So there comes a time when we're talking about history where all you can say is in the olden days. And then from the olden days, it could be 10,000 years ago. Oral history only lives for a certain period of time. And that's just the reality of it. And also, oral history has necessarily a kind of a bias. If your elder, if your grandfather, your great-grandfather, your uncle were to tell you, let's say me and you come from different tribes, right, which basically lived in the same area. Let's say there was a war at some point. Your uncle is going to say you won. My uncle is going to say we won. You know what I mean? Nobody's ever the victim in their oral story. Everybody is the hero in their narrative. So oral history is important in keeping information about lineages. It is critically important, but it is not a trustworthy messenger of fact, because everybody has to feel like they need to tell their story in a particular way in order to create a particular narrative, to portray a particular story. So it's important when we're listening to oral stories to say, I get that, but I also get that that's you, how it was given to you. Mine would have been different. But more than anything, oral history is important in that it adds to the richness of our experience of our own personal histories.
Your father was an instrumental figure in your life. How did his loss inform your spiritual journey, and in what ways has this defined your own role as a father?
Sometimes when I have these conversations with people about this book, the thing that I say a lot is that this book is not a spiritual book. It's not about do's and don'ts about spirituality. This is me going through a process of trying to understand spirituality. And the thing that kicked off my spiritual journey was the passing of my father, in that I came to want to understand what death means to us, what death is to us. Because after my father passed away, after several years, I started having dreams whereby I was told that he was trying to communicate with me from the other side. And I think for me, as much as we grew up, television talking about, ghosts and things and life after death, or even from a religious perspective, when I encountered that situation on a personal level, because now this is someone who raised me my entire life, who is now on the other side, I became curious as to what is that other side. And it didn't impact me in the sense of it being sad. It wasn't sad. I wasn't looking to understand him or to find him in a way of, I miss him, I want him to come back. It was more like if you were to find a message in a bottle on a beach and it comes from your father, you're like, okay, what does this mean? Where are you? Where does this thing come from? How did you know what I mean? So for me, it became a fascinating process of trying to understand. And as I said, I wasn't trying to find the truth about spirituality. I want to understand that realm. I want to understand, what is it that he's trying to say? How is he trying to say? If we were to video call, what would I see? You know what I mean? If we were to Zoom call, what would I see? What would we talk about? What kinds of things would he tell me? So that was literally my entry into the world of trying to understand spirituality.
And finally, what do you hope readers take away from your book?
I want to go back to when I said that this is not a self-help book. This book is intended for literally anyone who wants to understand more than trying to find solutions to spiritual problems. Because a lot of the time, we engage with spirituality as a problem-solving process. And for me, my thing is, there's a lot that I don't understand. And what I also want readers to know about my process in writing this book is that I didn't set out to find anything. All I was asking myself is, what is there? Let us then come with me, because I have the same questions that you have about spirituality. So how about we just journey together? I'm not a guru. I think at best I can describe myself as a travel companion. Let's do a road trip. I'll bring snacks. And then we'll discover things together. And the other thing is that what is important about this book is that it does not glorify African spirituality. I interrogate even the darker side of our history, even the most difficult aspects of our history that a lot of the time we don't want to engage about. So I wanted to lay bare an honest account of what it feels like to journey and trying to understand who I am, not just as a spiritual person, but as an African, as a father, as a person who grew up in a particular time, in a particular country, dealing with all of these things and the socioeconomics of it. So the book deals with a wide spectrum of topics. We deal with history, we deal with philosophy, we deal with the reality of our country, our history, and just how we as a people came to have these particular belief systems that we have today.
That was author Vusumzi Ngxande. discussing his book titled Journey Kwantu.